The morning rain drummed softly against the windows of Maple Street Diner when James Whitmore walked in, holding the small hand of his 8-year-old son, Daniel. The boy hadn't spoken a word since the accident that took his mother 3 years ago. James had tried everything: therapists, specialists, new environments, but Daniel's world remained silent, sealed by grief. Inside the diner, the breakfast rush hummed with chatter and clinking silverware. Behind the counter, waitress Helen Carter noticed the man and boy instantly. Maybe it was a weariness in James's eyes or the way Daniel clung to his father like a child adrift at sea. She approached with a gentle smile. "Good morning. I'm Helen. What can I start you off with?" "Coffee." "Black," James said, his tone tired but polite. "And chocolate milk for him, if you have it." Daniel didn't look up. His silence filled the space between them like a weight. Helen, a mother of 3 grown kids, had seen that kind of silence before, the kind that wasn't shyness but pain. She simply nodded and went to fetch their drinks. While she poured coffee, Helen overheard fragments of James's hushed phone call. "No, Dr. Peterson, he still hasn't said anything?" "Yes, I'll keep the appointment. It's been 3 years. The sound of defeat in his voice made her heart ache. When she returned with their drinks, she caught Daniel staring at the goldfish bowl by the register. The old fish swam slow circles in the cloudy water. "That's Goldie," Helen said softly. "She's been here longer than I have. I think she knows everyone's secrets but keeps them all to herself." For a moment, Daniel's eyes flickered with faint interest. James noticed it too, a spark he hadn't seen in months. It was small, but it was something. Over the next 2 weeks, the father and son became regulars. James extended his business trip just to stay in town. Every morning they sat in the same corner booth, and Helen brought Daniel his chocolate milk with quiet warmth. She learned their story in fragments. James was a tech entrepreneur who had built a company from nothing, but all his money couldn't heal what mattered most. His wife, Catherine, had died in a rainy highway crash. Daniel, who'd once been a bright, talkative boy, had gone silent that same day. The doctors call it selective mutism. James told her one morning, watching his son color on a paper placemat. "He can speak physically. He just won't. It's like he's protecting himself by staying quiet." Helen studied the boy's careful strokes with his crayon. She knew that kind of control. It was how people held themselves together when they were falling apart inside. One morning, while James stepped outside to take a business call, Helen sat down across from Daniel. Something in her told her to try. "You know," she began softly, "Goldie told me a secret yesterday. She said she gets lonely swimming in circles all by herself. She wishes someone would talk to her about the world outside her bowl." Daniel froze mid-stroke, glancing at the fishbowl, then at Helen. For the first time in 3 years, he met someone's eyes. Helen smiled but said nothing more, letting the moment breathe. When James returned, he saw a subtle difference. Daniel still colored quietly, but his shoulders weren't as tense. Something invisible had shifted. Days passed. Each morning, Daniel seemed a little more present, watching, listening. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed. The diner was quiet. Helen refilled Daniel's milk and noticed tears rolling silently down his cheeks. James had stepped out, leaving the boy alone. Helen's heart clenched. She slid into the booth beside him, speaking softly. "Oh, sweetheart." She handed him a napkin but didn't touch him. "Sometimes the sadness just needs to come out, doesn't it?" Daniel trembled, silent tears falling faster. Helen's own eyes filled. "I once knew a little boy who stopped talking, too," she whispered. "He thought if he stayed really quiet, the people he loved wouldn't leave." Daniel's sobs slowed. He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were deep pools of pain and recognition. "That little boy was my nephew," Helen said gently. "And one day he learned something important. The people who love us don't leave because of what we say or don't say. They stay because love isn't about being perfect. It's about being there." When James returned, he froze at the sight of his son, leaning toward Helen, calmer than he'd been in years. Later, Helen pulled James aside. "I think Daniel's silence isn't just about trauma," she said quietly. He's trying to protect you from his pain. Maybe he's afraid if he speaks, it'll break you. Her words hit him like a truth he'd been avoiding. The next morning, the sky cracked open with thunder as they entered the diner. The lights flickered. The air smelled of rain. Daniel's body stiffened instantly. His face went white, breathing shallow. The storm was too much like that day. James reached for him, but Daniel recoiled, shaking, lost in terror. Helen didn't hesitate. She knelt beside him, her voice calm and steady. "Daniel, honey, listen to me. You're safe. You're here with your daddy. The storm's outside, not in here." Daniel's lips quivered. Then, in a voice so faint she almost missed it, he whispered, I can't lose him too." Helen froze. James did too. Those were the first words Daniel had spoken in 3 years. "You're not going to lose him, sweetheart," Helen said, tears falling freely. "Look, he's right here. He's not going anywhere." Daniel turned toward his father, trembling. "Daddy," he sobbed, "I was so scared. I thought if I talked about Mommy, if I said how much it hurt, you might go away too. If I stayed quiet, maybe nothing bad would happen again." James gathered him into his arms, crying openly now. "Oh, Danny, I could never leave you. Never. We're going to be okay. Both of us." Helen stepped back, watching them, her heart full. She had just witnessed something sacred, the moment when silence broke and love spoke again. The storm passed, leaving behind sunlight that streamed to the diner windows, glinting off the wet pavement outside. James still held Daniel close, the boy's face buried against his chest. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. When Daniel finally looked up, his eyes were red but alive in a way they hadn't been for years. "I miss Mommy," he said softly. "I know, buddy," James whispered, brushing the boy's hair back. "So do I, but we'll miss her together. Okay? You don't have to be quiet anymore." Helen stood a few steps away, tears glistening as she turned to give them privacy. She'd seen countless sunrises behind this counter, but none as beautiful as this one. The morning a child found his voice again. Later that day, as James and Daniel prepared to leave, he turned to her. "You gave me back my son's voice," he said quietly. "If there's anything you ever want, name it." Helen smiled, shaking her head. "Just promise you'll keep talking to him. That's all the payment I need." But James Whitmore was a man of his word, and a man of means. 3 months later, the once familiar sign above the door had changed. Maple Street Diner was gone. In its place gleamed polished brass letters that read Helen's Kitchen. Helen stood in the middle of the renovated dining room, sunlight pouring through spotless windows, catching on the new brass plaque mounted on the wall. "Where silence finds its voice and hearts discover home." Her throat tightened as she read the inscription again. James had bought the diner and given it to her, renovated, restored, and filled with life. She hadn't believed him when he'd made the offer. But here it was, real and warm, alive with laughter and clinking dishes. The old goldfish bowl still sat on the counter, but now Goldie swam in a beautiful aquarium filled with colorful plants and new fish. Daniel's idea. "No one should be alone anymore," he'd said. The boy who once hid behind silence now filled the diner with chatter and laughter. Daniel's bright voice carried from the kitchen. "Miss Helen, Dad says the food critic from the city paper is coming next week." Helen laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then we'd better make sure we got plenty of your cookies ready, Mr. Future Chef." Daniel grinned proudly and rushed back into the kitchen, his curly hair bouncing as he carried a tray of his signature chocolate chip cookies. During the renovations, he discovered a love for baking, learning every trick Helen could teach him, including her grandmother's secret recipe. James followed behind him, dusted with flour and wearing a smile that reached his eyes. His once expensive suits had been replaced by rolled-up sleeves and a worn apron. His software empire practically ran itself now, leaving him time to focus on the things that mattered most, his son and this little diner that had become their second home. "You know," James said, leaning against the counter beside Helen, "I used to think success was about numbers and market share. Turns out, it's about mornings like this." Helen smiled softly. And chocolate milk. He laughed. Yeah, that too. Daniel came bounding out again, holding a perfectly baked cookie. Taste test, Miss Helen. She took a bite and closed her eyes. Perfect. You've officially passed the cookie exam. Daniel's face lit up with pride. Dad, did you hear that? She said, perfect. James nodded, eyes shining. That's because she's the best teacher around. Helen blushed slightly but smiled. Watching Daniel laugh and chatter made her heart ache in the best way. He was proof that healing didn't happen in one grand moment, but in 1,000 small ones. Over shared breakfast, gentle words, and second chances. As the dinner rush began, the bell over the door chimed. Daniel ran to greet the arriving customers, his voice cheerful and bright. Welcome to Helen's kitchen. Wait till you try our cookies. Helen tied her apron tighter and smoothed her hair. But before she could move, James caught her hand. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing what we couldn't, for helping him find his way back to me. Helen's eyes softened. I didn't do it alone. Sometimes all it takes is someone who listens, and someone brave enough to finally speak. They stood there for a moment, watching Daniel move from table to table, chatting with ease, laughter bubbling from him like sunlight through clouds. Helen turned toward the window where the rain had once fallen hard against the glass. Now, the afternoon sun poured in, reflecting off the aquarium where Goldie swam peacefully among her new companions. Some nights, when the diner quieted and the three of them stayed after closing, sharing stories, testing recipes, and planning tomorrow's specials, Helen found herself marveling at how life could rebuild itself in the simplest moments. Love, she realized, didn't always arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes, it came in the form of a cup of chocolate milk, a whispered story about a lonely goldfish, and the patience to wait for a frightened child to speak when he was ready. As the laughter of customers filled the room and the smell of cookies and apple pie drifted to the air, Helen smiled. Because this warmth, this noise, this life was the sound of healing. And somewhere in the middle of that cozy diner, a boy who had once believed silence could protect him now knew the truth. That love, spoken or not, always finds its way home.